I have a comment and a question. And my comment is, you said that the EU continues to lag behind technologically. And I think that part of the reason why they have trouble attracting the best and brightest is because they can't even keep their own best and brightest within their borders. That's where the problem begins. And my question would be, you mentioned patterns, you mentioned a kind of model for the rise and fall of superpowers. And do you think there is a kind of life cycle for that? And if so, at which stage is the United States in? Or is this predictable or something more flexible than that?
Great. That's a great question. So first of all, thanks for that. I think I sort of noted that in the book too. It's interesting. Yes, we have a surprising number of very talented Europeans who come to the United States, actually, kind of confirming the point in some ways that that we're viewed as this place that if you really want to strike it big, in fact, it's sort of almost embarrassing in some parts of Europe to talk about wanting to make too much money. You know, so this country stands for something, and actually some of the universities are consciously trying to reverse that now. In Germany, I have some friends. They're just, we need to build it more on the American model. So thank you for that point. On the trajectory thing, that's a great question, and I really don't know the answer either. I mean, the weird thing about a lot of these hyperpowers, if you go for the ones that I picked, is that they do have very different lifespans. So Rome's is just, and again, you could count, the golden age or the whole thing. It's hard to do this. But I can say that the Dutch Republic, to the extent that you buy my case that it was a hyperpower, its little golden age only lasted 50 years, right? And I actually don't think its decline had anything to do with intolerance in that particular case. I think it just, lots of other factors. But again, empires can decline for lots of different reasons. Bad economic policies, corruption, natural disasters. So as to the trajectory of where we are right now, I can only say that I think it's really going to turn a lot on our policies going forward. I would have been very much more optimistic with the election and kind of, a lot of the way that President Obama thinks is more like the way that I would think would be the right way to relate to the rest of the world. But of course now we've got this massive economic crisis, so it's very hard for me to say. So I'll only just fall back on the thing I already said before, which is I think it's too early to just announce definitively that the era of dominance is over. But it's a great question.
Okay, so just one question in my head a little bit. But from your book, the ideal that I kept getting from relative tolerance was assimilation and like the perceptions that other people have of the state of the nation. So could you, I guess, talk a bit about the difference between your ideals of relative tolerance and assimilation?
Okay.
Or the ideal of just glue assimilation?
Oh, right, okay. That's a great question. Glue, I think. Yeah, relative tolerance is a little bit different. And maybe the big mistake I made was in using the term tolerance at all. Some people said just call this ability to recruit or pluralisticness. That would be, because I kind of use this term, but I really don't mean it in the modern sense of treating all people equally. I really don't, right? But it's just, it's just, can you attract more of the world's best and brightest for whatever reasons? Like a good example is Rome, by the way. Rome, it had slavery, it had, it had gladiator fights where people tore little children apart, but I'm calling them tolerant, right? Relatively tolerant. Why can I say that? Because I'm saying, like, unlike other people that limited their armies to pure this or pure that, Rome said, we're going to be colorblind, right? We're going to be colorblind, we'll invite all these people in, and that's how they got this massive world. If you look at the people who were part of the Roman army, they just absorbed them. So that's all I mean by relative tolerance. I think your question about how does assimilation fits in does have more to do with glue, and maybe does have to do with tolerance. It's actually tricky because it's different. Like another way you could say it, you're absolutely right. Like if you could say, when I say that the Persians had no glue, nothing to hold, that no political identity hold it together, you can also say that all those people it conquered were not assimilated. They didn't feel Persian. So that's a really smart way of thinking about it. The reason I didn't use it is because many of the ancient powers that were tolerant and that actually had glue, they had partial assimilation. That is, they allowed, there was something that, well, first of all, nobody really had it but the Romans, I say, you know. But to the extent that they, there are some models of tolerance where you actually just let the people kind of speak their own tongues and just be like they are. And then you're tolerant because you allow them to be as they want to, but you don't really try to turn them into anything else. And so I include that as tolerance. Okay, so maybe you're right. Maybe this glue thing is closely related to assimilation. The reason I didn't want to go there is because there's such a debate about assimilation and the amount of it that we should have, even in this country or Europe, right? So should we, like in France, does assimilation mean people should not wear headscarves so that we can all be more alike, or does it mean that, you know? So that's why I have this idea of glue, just meaning, how can we connect people, like something that connects people and makes them feel part of the same enterprise and feel sort of loyal to each other? Well, anyway, so that's, maybe I'll think a little bit about more of that.
Please keep your questions quick.
Okay, I'll go faster too.
I'm trying to reconcile your ideas about the rise of a hyperpower coinciding with more tolerance and the decline with less with the history of the United States in terms of immigration policies and the voting franchise. In immigration policy, we didn't become more tolerant until 65. We restricted immigration mainly to whites until 65, and that sort of coincides with our decline. Likewise, the voting franchise in the beginning was restricted to white property owning male Protestants, right? And it's
That's where you work.
right.
That's where you work.
Okay. In most states.
Maryland, they allow Catholics.
Okay. And lately, with just the voting franchise has been opened up in more recent history, right?
I have a slightly different take on that. I mean, I think that for all those years that we were very intolerant, I would say periods where we limited the franchise to only white males, that I would consider that relatively, I mean, there was definitely a period where we were, I think, clearly less tolerant than Britain. They had already abolished slavery. We still hadn't. They were doing that, I mean, maybe for strategic reasons, right? Britain was doing it for strategic reasons. There was lots of, none of this, as I'm trying to say, is for the pureness of their, but I definitely think in the 19th century, we were not the most tolerant nation on earth. It is true, it's a complicated story, in that we have always had this reputation as a land of immigrants. So we've always been able to pull, people in. But again, I guess the main thing, I'll just say very quickly, that there was just one thing, I don't know if you meant it or meant something else, but I disagree. I think that it was after 1965 that we became tolerant. I mean, the most tolerant nation. It was only after our civil rights revolution that we became. So that, to me, coincides with the point at which we could become an hyperpower. Now, it's not it's not a sufficient condition. The Soviet Union had to fall, right? I mean, it's not like, but I still think the timing works out.
Just going off your discussion on the economic crisis, the rest of the world seems to be looking to us to solve this because we're the ones that started it, hypothetically. Gordon Brown saying we need to take leadership. Martin Wolf last week said it's all on Obama's shoulders. Do you not think that reinforces the standing of us as the hyperpower? And I mean, I don't know, for me, I would see it as pushing our length of time in the hyperpower position as longer, and how do we respond in that role, being that generally we haven't accepted ourselves as hyperpower around the world in our actions. So.
Well, I really agree with you, and I bet a lot of people don't, But I mean, I really have had this observation. I think it's ironic. At the same time, when I interviewed by European stations or whatever, people, there's this really schizophrenic thing. I feel like it's schizophrenic. I mean, part of it is almost like a glee, which is like, in one interview I had from a very smart Netherlands people, they were, so which model, now that the US model is clearly wrong, which do you think the US will embrace? Brazil's model, China's model, or the EU model, And I just think it's just too early, So, but the schizophrenic part is at the same time, in the same show, it's kind of like, so how's the US going to get the rest of the world out of this, Everyone's desperate for, So I do think that suggests that at the moment we are still viewed as the hyperpower, or at least whatever. Maybe that's all I'll say about that one.